In this week's episode of NDVision. Oh, your
in
knees.
Maryland. My knees.
Don't you have to, like, smash
that's
your
when
knee
I
against
knew.
the-
That's when I knew. I said, basketball and carpet do not go along well together. So I'm up there playing.
Yeah. I do the same. I'll grit my teeth and go like this because
the music has consumed you at that point, and that's the way I feel. The problem with some of those guys is they wrote all their songs at the very top of their range.
Yeah.
So when they were in their 20s and 30s, they could easily go out there and fly up to the top of their range and hit those notes. But now, Bon Jovi's probably 60, early 60s or whatever he is. Those notes might not even be in his range.
Wheelhouse. Yeah. Hello and welcome to this episode of NDVision. I'm proudly joined here by esteemed Music Alley owner and ZOAR frontman, Rick Whitwood. Hi, Rick.
Good morning, Nick. How are you?
That was probably the easiest intro that I've ever done. And you don't have to lean in. If you want to move, feel free to move the mic back to wherever you want it.
All right.
So the first question I ask just about every guest is just tell me about yourself.
Well,
you can start back as early as you want to and go from there.
Well, I'm a kind of a Wellsville kind of guy, or Allegheny County kind of guy. I've been here most of my life. So I was born at Jones and really enjoyed a great childhood in Wellsville, which growing up in the 70s and 80s was a pretty idyllic time to grow up around this area, as is probably today compared to other choices. And I did live in Baltimore for a short time.
Really?
In the mid-'80s, right out of high school, and decided to come back and start a family, and I've been here ever since. So,
wow, I was born in Baltimore.
Aha.
Yeah, and half of my family lives down in Baltimore County or White Marsh area. And
oh yeah, I've been to the White Marsh Mall. Is that still there?
Yeah. It's still popular too.
I think it was brand new when I lived down there.
Yeah,
84, 85.
They still have the carousel in there and everything.
Yeah.
I don't know if they had that when you were.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So you lived in Baltimore for a while, born, bred, pretty much raised in Wellsville. I mean, you're front man for ZOAR. When did your love for music start, and how?
Well, I would say about the middle school, music was always kind of prevalent as far as listening in my house. I was the youngest of five, so I remember way back my mom having records of like Simon and Garfunkel and stuff like that. And my older sister, I remember her having like Jethro Tull and Jimi Hendrix experience and things like that. So,
very guitar driven.
Very guitar driven. And then, we had kids all in between the two of us. So, we had 45s. And so music was always a big part of my life. And I remember having an old record player that looks almost like a little suitcase. And I remember the first record I remember having that was kind of like my own and listening to it, probably 3, 4, 5 years old, was Johnny Horton's Greatest Hits.
Who's John? What songs does he sing?
He's a country singer. I don't even know how we got the record because no one really in my house, my parents weren't really necessarily country music people, but he was a storytelling singer from the 50s and 60s. It was a country artist, pretty major country artist. And his hits included Sink the Bismarck and what's the other one? Battle of New Orleans.
Okay.
Great story songs.
Yeah. So that was your first record. When was your first guitar?
My first guitar.
When did you start playing guitar?
Okay, so when I was in 9th grade, I had been enamored with guitar for a year or two at that point and hadn't gotten a guitar or anything. But one of my buddies got a guitar and he hadn't learned to play it yet. But I can remember staying at his house, and I think we were in 8th grade at that point, and he had this guitar. and it came from the Sears and Roebuck catalog.
Yeah.
And it was called a Global, and it came with a matching amp, and it was sort of a Les Paul shaped guitar, a copy, of course. But I remember staying overnight with him sometime in 8th grade and just thinking, wow, that thing is the shape and the form and the way it looked and the way it felt when you held it. It was like, I have to investigate this at some point.
Yeah.
So I started saving my money in 9th grade and thinking about the potential for guitar. And came time about spring, basketball season had just ended, and all my buddies and myself were sort of preparing for baseball. We were freshmen at this point, and there were a few things that happened that made me question whether I was going to play baseball or not, even though I felt like I could compete at baseball very well. I had convinced myself, as your 13 or 14-year-old mind sometimes doesn't always think as clearly as it should, that if I played baseball, then I probably wouldn't have time if I did get a guitar. So the day came where tryouts were, and we went to the Brooklyn School, which is down on Brooklyn Avenue, or was down on Brooklyn Avenue, where the now tennis courts are.
There was another school there?
There was a school there, and it was a middle school. When I started school, I went to kindergarten there, so it was a school. We used to have neighborhood schools, which is really cool for Wellsville. So you didn't even meet your eventual classmates until 3rd or 4th grade, because the Martin Street Medical Building was a school. The Brooklyn School that I was speaking of was a school. And then the elementary building before they added on was a school. So you went in your own neighborhood.
Really?
And my neighborhood was, I was a Highland Avenue kid. So Brooklyn School was my school, and it eventually became the middle school. So the bus left from the middle school at the time, from high school, in the middle school, and it went to the practice. And all day I had taken my baseball glove, and I had taken $80.
Wow.
So that was my budget. And I had been agonizing for a couple of weeks on what to do. And that day I remember having a study hall late in the day and still trying to decide if I was going to get on the late bus and head for JV baseball tryouts, or walk up to Rice Music and buy a guitar. So,
what's Rice Music?
Rice Music was one of the really cool old stores that used to be on Wellsville's Main Street back in the days when we were just lined with all kinds of stores.
Where?
So Rice Music is now where the Gamers Portal is.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Kind of next to Elsie Whitford there in Beef House.
Yep. So it was there for many, many, many years. Rice Music House. It was a venerable old music shop the first time I strolled in the late 70s or early 80s. So
I've never heard. I feel like I've heard of most of the popular old stores, but I've never heard of this one.
Rice Music House, yeah. And that's where I didn't go to baseball practice, and I went and I bought a guitar. And it was a Norma, which is a Japanese guitar that was kind of like surfy looking. And lucky enough, a friend of mine, Court Dunham, went and met me there, and he played a few, and he put his stamp of approval on that particular guitar.
Really?
And that was the first guitar that I ever had.
So now, it's funny that you had someone else pick it out for you. Now, could you ever let someone else pick out a guitar for you? You'd have to play it yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Guitars are very, very personal, and so they gotta like feel this right. They have to sound great. They have to fit your body and feel like it becomes part of you. So yeah,
I feel like I know within the first 20 seconds if I like a guitar or not, and then if I don't, I'll just kind of set it back down.
yeah, that sounds about right.
My wife, whenever I used to drag her to Guitar Center and here and any other music shop that I would see, and she'd know automatically if I liked a guitar because I wouldn't put it back. Yeah. I'd just keep playing it. The other ones, I'd play for a few seconds, maybe a minute, and then I'd put it back because I didn't really care for it. Or it was out of tune and I didn't feel like tuning it.
There you go. Yeah.
So you got your first guitar, and you had someone else you had your buddy pick it out for you. Did it come with an amp or?
Didn't have enough money for an amp, so that was the next benchmark of saving for me. At the time, I really had dropped my paper roots, and so it was down to like maybe playing cards and this game. I can't remember. You played quarters, and three of you would flip. And
You were a hustler then.
I had to get good at those things early so I could save up for the amp. But I had a stereo at home at that point where I played my records on, and it had an input.
This
and it was
a suitcase.
This was now I had upgraded to like what they would call a shelf system,
Okay,
or a tabletop system. So it was a nice little all-in-one stereo that had a 8-track, didn't have a cassette, 8-track radio, turntable, and 2 speakers.
That was cutting edge back then, though, right?
Cutting edge. And it had an input, a 1/4-inch input, which I plugged my guitar into. And as long as I kept it real quiet, I didn't damage the stereo speakers.
Yeah.
That was my first 6 months at least, was playing through that or no amp at all.
And that was zero distortion either.
Zero distortion.
Or overdrive.
Now
right?
you know why I always mine are all clean Fender sounds.
So it was a surf style guitar because you play Fender styles now.
I do. Yes, I do. For a long time, my favorite guitar was a Gibson Les Paul, which I still have. Probably the first 15 years of ZOAR, that would have been considered my number one, a Gibson Les Paul.
Okay.
And if anybody out there has Les Pauls, they know that they're kind of temperamental, and tuning is a little temperamental on them. At least I've always found. Love the guitars, but I tried a couple of Telecasters, and you could leave them on the band truck for a week, and the temperature could be 0, and then you could pull it out, and you could play the gig, and it would still be in tune.
Still in tune.
And then I just fell in love with the way it felt, and the way it played, and the way it sounded. And it's very simple guitar, so there's not a lot of bells and whistles. But once you get used to the layout and where the volume control is and how simple the guitar is, that just sort of like melted into my style and my,
And they have a deeper tone than a Strat too.
The Tellys?
Yeah.
They can have a sharper tone too.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because, well, I'm only thinking because my generation is pop punk and or nu metal. So the nu metal guys, if they played a Fender, they'd play a Telecaster, and then like the pop punk guys would play a Squire like Green Day or Blink-182.
Yeah. Yep. The weird thing of it is those guitars do get associated with a certain sound, but those guitars that you mentioned and more are such universal instruments. They can be, you really can set them up to your own taste, depending on how you set your amp up. And so it's really interesting how versatile a guitar can be.
Yeah. I'm surprised that you went with Fender, because I feel like your generation would have been like the hammer guitars and stuff like that, right?
Well, we
or the
were
Jacksons, or
no, that should have been.
Yeah,
that's true. But my buddies and me that all started playing and getting into music, even though like the stuff that was popular in the 80s, early 80s and stuff, that became real popular, bands like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, and you would see kids wearing those shirts and whatnot. And then new wave bands or bands that might have had a popish, like Cars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We weren't into that. Even though they're great bands, and I like some of them now, we were into the Doors and the Allman Brothers and the Stones and Leonard Skinner and stuff like that.
Southern rock, kind of.
Southern rock, the guitar players were so good.
Yeah.
They were like the killers of sound. So as young guitar players, it was hard not to, although some of my buddies, or other kids would have been influenced hugely like by Van Halen, and hats off to those players. They're incredible players, but they weren't what really touched us. We were more into what the hippie guys were into.
Yeah.
Just a generation before us, and that's where we all cut our teeth on that kind of music.
That's super interesting. So you got your first guitar. You eventually got an amp, I'm assuming, after playing.
Yeah, saved up, and I got I think it was $99. The amp was a little bit more than the guitar, actually.
Really?
At the time.
How big was it?
It was a probably a small, not a tiny practice amp, the next size up from that.
Okay.
It was a Fender Harvard, which was a solid state amp that came out at the time. I think it was 20 or 25 watts. And I think it had one 10-inch speaker.
10-inch?
Enough to play gigs if you cranked it all the way up, because that's what we used at the beginning.
I have a crate that's a 1x15, I think it is, that I just have in my studio, and I don't need anything louder. I remember I bought I bought a Marshall half stack from you at one point. And that was too much in my parents' basement. Were you in any bands before? Like, when did you feel like you were good enough to join a band? Or did you just get excited and say, I want to join a band?
Well, guitar's an interesting journey. Everybody wants to be good very quickly. Yeah. And it is just not like that. It takes so much time and so much practice. I almost gave up. I got the guitar in March, and I think it was well into the summer, just as 10th grade was starting. I really still couldn't play anything that sounded musical to me.
Really?
Nothing. I had a book, a Mel Bay book, and I just couldn't even, I had no relevance on even how to tune it. So finally, and neither did my buddies. So it was just like this mystery that we couldn't seem to solve.
Was that before they had tuners, or?
The tuners were even more than the guitars and the amps at the time.
Jeez.
Yes, the electronic tuners at the time were about $120.
Did they have like a record that was like a guitar tuning record that you could buy or something?
Pitch pipes were popular, or these little pitch pipes that had the 6 guitar notes. Huh. And I had a pitch pipe, but it has a tone, even though it plays the correct note. It's a reading sound compared to a string sound. And at the time, my ear wasn't developed enough to connect the two, to tune my guitar with the pitch pipe. I just couldn't do it. But finally, this I booked a lesson and got my guitar tuned.
Was it at Rice?
Was not at Rice. The same guy that helped me pick the guitar out, Court. Yeah. I started taking a couple of lessons, and he tuned my guitar. And when he tuned the guitar, then I played a couple of the chords that I had been working on that sounded so bad when the guitar was grossly out of tune that actually sounded musical. Huh. So then a little light came on that maybe if I stick with this, because I nearly quit. I nearly just gave up and said, okay,
and how old were you at this time?
I would have been 14 probably.
Okay.
Yeah. Entering 10th grade, it almost just was like too much. I played football. I played basketball. I thought, well, I'll just stick to sports. And,
I didn't realize you were that athletic of a guy.
Yeah, I'm in the Athletic Hall of Fame.
I don't know. I went to science.
Basketball was my thing. So, yeah, I eventually concentrated pretty heavily on basketball.
Okay. Yep. So you're 14, you're playing a bunch of sports, and in the midst, you're learning guitar. So did you not start or join any bands until after high school, or? So
we really had the blueprint for our band set up before we even got the guitars.
Oh, okay.
You know how that is when you're like in middle school or 9th or 10th grade, you kind of lay out your buddies. Okay, this kid's going to play guitar, and here's our bass player, and we need to raid the band room and find somebody that knows how to play drums, because none of us play drums. So we kind of had the general layout of who, we just needed to learn to play. So we just weren't making absolute noise. And it progressed. So by the time I say I was a senior, we had a band together. Our band was called Jack Frost at the time.
Okay.
Mostly high school kids. One kid had just graduated, and one guy was, we were 15 or 16. I think he was 21.
Oh, he was the one that was buying beer.
He was the old guy. Yeah, he probably was the one buying beer.
Oh, well, it was 18 back then, right?
It was 18. Yeah. And that's how we started. And we we actually progressed from just like garage sounding band to actually sounding like a real band, even though we still were not really seasoned musicians or anything.
Right.
We could go and sound like a real band, at least, and get through a night.
Now, did you sing right off the bat? Or
We
was there
had a
different
singer at the time, and he was good, and that helped. That was Dean Parker. He was the one that was just in college, ahead of us. So that helped. At first, I did not sing enough to know that I couldn't sing well. So, luckily, just like guitar, at the time, my girlfriend she played some piano and she played violin and she sang somewhat, and she actually helped me learn how to sing.
Okay.
And figure out the pitches and your range and all that stuff. So
I can't sing at all. My wife is a singer. She's in the Genesee Valley chorus that they have.
Well, she could do the same for you, I'm sure.
I told Rich here the same. I just sound like a dying cat when I try to sing, so it's best that I just don't do it.
Singing for me, it was like last on the list. Believe it or not, the main reason that attracted me to guitar to begin with,
ladies.
No, that seems like a typical answer, but that was not even in the realm of thinking for me. It was writing songs.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had always been interested in kind of like the art of writing songs, and I always fancied myself sort of as a word guy, and I still do. I love to hear words and language that lays out, that is inspiring, or just in a way that like can strike a chord. So I had the idea of writing songs, but I knew I needed an instrument to help me in that endeavor. So I got the guitar. So songwriting and guitar are my number 1 and 2. But really, to bring the voice to the songs that seems connected and genuine with the lyrics, so there's no middleman, so to speak, then I started working on the singing part of it, and just kind of went from there.
That's so interesting. You're an artist, like a true artist.
Well,
who is also a jock.
Yeah, which is an unusual combination.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, early on, when you're in an area far removed from the musical epicenters of the world, you realize that, you're probably not going to be a touring musician without relocating, or you're not going to ever get your songs heard by a huge number or by the masses. But early on, even when we started ZOAR, that was sort of one of our missions, was not just to be a cover band.
Yeah.
We had to have an original music component, and that's sort of one of the threads that brought us really tightly together. And so we've done it since then, and ZOAR's had 2 albums. I've had 1 of my own, and so even though we've never had any illusion of being like touring superstars or anything like that, the creative artistry was always part of my musical life, for sure.
So you've done enough with ZOAR that you're happy with what you've done.
Yeah. We were on a 35-year, soon to be 36-year run at this point. And obviously we have more. I wrote this recently on a post. We have more days in the rearview mirror than we have, looking forward with the band. But it's certainly been a great run and a great experience, which I thought probably would last 4 or 5 years, which is the typical life of a local band, maybe not even that long.
Yeah.
Because there's so many things to balance within a group to keep it going, scheduling regular jobs.
Families eventually.
Families, personalities, activities that you like to do for leisure, things. So it's amazing that we've, been together as long as we have.
So when did your high school band kind of fizzle out, and when did ZOAR start?
Okay,
or were there a couple in between?
The Baltimore was in between.
Okay,
yeah,
Baltimore.
Yep. So as we graduated, I graduated in '83. So as me and my buddies graduated, everybody kind of laid out plans for college or what to do after school. That's kind of, that's the point that it fizzled out right at the tail end of our senior year. And we all had made sort of plans of what was going to come after for us, and after a few diversions, I ended up in a recording school.
Oh,
in Ohio.
Okay.
It was like 3 months, called the Recording Workshop. It's still there.
I went to a trade school as well. It was the Sheffield Institute of Recording Arts.
Okay, yep.
in Phoenix, Maryland.
Yep, I knew right where that place was.
Really?
Yes. As a matter of fact, weird thing, that was a studio as well.
Yeah, it still is. So they recorded All Time Low there when I was in school. So I love telling people that I know the guys from All Time Low, and they never believe me until I show them a music video that I did in the studio in that school with them.
Well, how about that? So when I went to Baltimore in '84 after this school, and I got a job in a small studio, part-time, because the studio was part-time.
Okay.
And I was, hoping to get sort of into the recording studio kind of thing as a career. And I had to work, I worked as a carpet installer, with a carpet installer at first as a helper. And so I got to know an interesting fabric of working folks, because that's a whole culture into itself is like carpet and flooring guys.
How are your
in
knees?
Maryland. My knees,
Don't you have to, smash
that's
your
when
knee
I
against
knew.
the-
That's when I knew. I said basketball and carpet do not go along well together. So I knew that wasn't going to be a lifelong career, carpet. So I was looking for other jobs, and I had applied at the Sheffield studio. There happened to be a guy there that knew a guy that I knew, one of those deals. But anyway, this guy worked at Sheffield, but he was also a carpet measurer. So
Yeah.
he'd go out and just measure jobs, real easy thing. And he was somehow involved in this studio. So I got his card, and he told me to leave off a resume. And at the time, we were real torn on whether to move back to Wellsville. I had just gotten married, and we had a baby, and facing the idea of staying in Maryland, near a more urban area, raising and putting your kid in school in that sort of atmosphere, or maybe moving back to a small town. We were like undecided, but we had just decided to move back to Wellsville. And I got called from Sheffield studio for an interview. And I talked to the guy that was a sort of a pseudo connection. But, I had the educational background, at least to be entry levels assistant engineer or something like that. And the plans were already made. So I, if a week or two before that, I could be worked at
You could have been
Sheffield.
one of my teachers.
That's right.
This is
been.
wild.
Yeah.
What a tiny world. A tiny, tiny world.
Yep. And they were doing important bands when I went out there. I think at the time there was a band that was a national band called Crack the Sky. I believe they were in the studio recording at Sheffield when I made my first connection there.
So did you live in Timonium or Towson or?
I lived in Middle River.
Middle River's where my dad lives right
Okay.
now.
Middle
so I
River.
go down there multiple times a year.
Oh, wow. Middle River. I lived in
Yeah.
Middle River in
Do you miss the crabs?
I liked them, but I never loved them. I'm not a
I
huge
love
seafood.
them.
Yeah.
What about Natty Bo? Do you miss Natty Bo at all? Did you ever drink that?
No, I never. I'm not really a drinker, so I don't know that. What I miss is up here we have snow cones.
Oh, yeah.
Down there they have snowballs.
Snowballs, yep.
And it's a muchly finer shredded
Shaved ice.
Oh, so it's incredible. They
had
were incredible.
stands everywhere.
And they also have this thing. If you ever go to Baltimore, people, you got to go to a pit beef stand.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Incredible. They're just amazing. So pit beef and snowballs. If you go to Baltimore.
And their crabs and silver queen corn. I think it's called silver queen.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
super white.
Yeah.
It's still super sweet too.
Yeah.
This is so crazy. This is a tiny world.
Yeah.
Because half my family lives.
Yeah, so I'm kind of a nostalgic kind of guy. So many years later, my niece got married, and she still lives down there in that area, and went to the wedding. This was probably 2004 or 5, somewhere in there. And I had to make sure that I went to, even though the wedding was probably, 45 minutes away, I made sure that I drove back through Middle River.
Yeah.
Just to see where the apartment complex was. Everything had changed a great deal. And I just wanted to like make that one more connection with where I lived when I was in Baltimore. Yeah. So
I do that too. Whenever we go down through Philadelphia, I'll stop and I'll swing by in Chester, our very first apartment, and then I'll drive through Media where I worked and stuff.
Nice.
So you moved back now. You have a wife, you have a kid. How is ZOAR the next step, or is there bands in between?
Real close. That would have been in like 85.
Okay.
And at that point, WJQZ was just starting.
Yeah.
And I applied there, and I got a job working the weekends, and I laid the ground. I worked at the Soundtrack in Alfred for a couple of years. That was a stereo store.
Oh, all right.
And that was a cool place to work. And as that was all kind of going on at the same time, working weekdays there and weekends on the radio station, I laid plans for my first foray into entrepreneurship, and I had a indoor miniature golf course.
What?
On the Bolivar Road where Whitwood Motors is now.
Yeah.
That was an indoor miniature golf course and game room.
No crap.
Yeah.
Wow, we need stuff like that nowadays. we
really
do.
It was a really cool idea. We were there 86 to 89-ish, something like that, about 3 years. It was a blast. It took an incredible amount of work to get it laid out. It was the old Wellsville hangar, so it certainly had the room.
Because the airport used to be right there.
Yeah. So that building started its life as the hangar. It was Milton Suite Motors for a time from late 60s to the mid 70s, and then my dad bought the building and had Whitwood Motors there.
Yeah.
And he used to have used cars in the area that became the miniature golf course. But with the gas crunch and all the weird things, the oil embargo, and it sort of like really disrupted that business over the years. And he was still fixing cars and doing repairs and things of that nature, even customizing vans. But the other section, the large section, was largely unused. So we decided to try. It was an idea to put an indoor miniature golf course in with a game room, and it turned out to be a really cool place. It was called Fun Putt, and it was great. The one thing of it is being in the Northeast, and the type of the building it's a tin building.
Oh, yeah.
The winters where you did most of your business in the winter because it was an activity, but the heat bills even then were like, the overhead was unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's one thing we probably should have planned a little better when we laid the place out, was maybe some sort of
insulation,
better insulation. But it was such a huge space to warm, keep warm anyway. And it was outside the village limits, so you're talking, everything, electricity costs. So the overhead probably was the one impediment that kept that from being a long-term success. But for a while there, it was incredible. It was an incredible run. And I was in my early 20s, and it was just a blast to go work in an indoor miniature golf course, with a game room. And
I probably would have gone on some dates there.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, it definitely became a teenage hangout because of the game room. So on Fridays and Saturdays, it was loaded. I still see folks around that are of that age group, just younger than me, that were teenagers, and I always consider them like, hey, that's a Fun Putt kid, because they would have come to Fun Putt, and when their parents dropped them off, largely they were in very good hands. Because I tried to keep a real close watch on everything and make sure
safe environment.
Yeah, safe environment. And all that. But all that was going on is that, I was thinking about that might not be the, end game for my business career.
Right.
I took a full-time job at the radio station, WJQZ. So
and that's 103.5 or?
Back then it is, I believe. Back then it was 93.5 WJQZ.
Yeah. I'm going to have Bob Mangles on the show in a couple weeks, I think. So.
Okay, so I think he bought the station from the Murphys.
Really?
Bought the station from Mike Baldwin and Terry Swift, who I worked for. I worked at WJQZ for the first 5 years, essentially.
That's so interesting. I thought that I mean, as long as I can remember, it's been Bob Mangles' voice.
Right. Yep. So before Before that, WJQZ was all live DJs. It was a wonderful, cool station to work for.
What years were that?
Started in 86, I believe, 85, 86. I think I came aboard in 86, 3 or 4, 5 months after they started as a weekend guy. And they had live DJs all the way up until they even had overnight guys. Yeah, they have overnight guys.
That's wild.
Yeah. Yep. So I originally had the Saturday and Sunday morning programs. And then eventually my first weekday stint, I was the afternoon drive guy.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I moved up to midday.
Afternoon. I feel like afternoon drive guy would be.
That was a
like
pretty good
premiere, right?
That was pretty good, yeah.
Because during the day, who's
businesses listen during the day, and you get home.
Oh, okay.
But afternoon drive was good.
Yeah,
I like that shift. And
did people call in requests and stuff? Where you're like,
oh yeah,
call in your requests that you'd like to hear after a long day of work.
Oh yeah.
Can I hear your radio voice?
It's the same.
Is it the same?
Oh yeah, same. I've been told many times I have a distinctive voice.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to change. I wanted everybody to. I didn't want to get on there and try to put on some sort of. Yeah. We had people that did that, and it always sounded sort of hokey and pretentious. This is Eric Wilson from WJQZ.
Yeah. Wow.
Come on, dude.
my friend Heidi. It used to be Heidi Mangle. She's married now, but we always pick on her because she definitely has a radio voice. She's like, "Welcome to the weather outside is going to be double nickels," and she doesn't sound like that in real life. And she's like, "I don't have a radio voice." Like, yeah, you do. So you're working at the radio station. Have we gotten to ZOAR yet, or is it?
Okay, yeah. So that's when ZOAR started. In 1988.
Year I was born.
Maybe even 87. 87. The guys around that were literally like my musicians that I had always admired and sort of like patterned myself as far as professionalism and things like that when it approach toward musical gigs and things. They were putting a band together, and I was lucky enough to sit in and do a couple of rehearsals, and I had a project going already, and so they started and played for a few months, and then. Actually, one of their members decided to leave. They had a female vocalist at the very first beginning, and then the project that I had going really was farther away. It was in Bath, and it looked like it might not. It didn't look like we all had the same kind of musical interest, which is tough.
Yeah.
So I jumped in, and we, jumped back with the ZOAR guys and rehearsed it up and started playing from 88 till now. So.
And did you jump right in singing, or did you just ring guitar?
They had great singers already in the band. Court Dunham, guitar player, great singer. Monty Cases was the drummer, also a great singer. So they had really good vocals already. So luckily, I was able to come in with. The songs that I had. We had already worked up a couple of originals when I first jammed with them right at the very beginning.
Okay. Wow.
And I was super interested in the original thing. And then I brought probably 4 or 5 songs vocally. So we've always split it up. That's been one of the beauties of the band. Even now is everybody's voice fits in a different area.
Right.
So you pick a song, and you kind of know which guy should sing that song. Generally, it's usually very evident. And
how did you become? I mean, well, you're the lead of the band as far as the face wise. When you're on stage, you're up front and center, right? How did that happen? Did it just kind of work out that way?
Somewhere along the line. I started singing more, and then we had a membership change in like 92, I think, somewhere in there. And at that point, I would say there was a slight vacuum in somebody that would get up there and speak, and maybe if you were at a wedding, announce the songs. Maybe if you were at a regular gig, be the one to engage the crowd. So I just filled that vacuum, pretty naturally, and just went from there.
You got the face,
I guess, and when you play guitar, I get lost up there. So sometimes you're making these incredible faces, as you're playing, and I don't care.
So
I get lost.
My wife harasses me all the time because when I play guitar, I move my lips to I don't know why, but I move my lips to the rhythm or whatever I'm doing to keep me in time. I don't know what it is.
Well, here's what I think: if you're really engaged and it's really flowing right from the deepest part of you, you're you forget everything about you. You're not even worried or thinking about what you might be doing. So I'm up there playing.
I do the same. I'll grit my teeth and go like this because
the music has consumed you at that point, and that's the way I feel. So
when we go see one of my all-time favorite guitarist is Mark Tremonti, and he makes some faces, man. Oh, he's just pushing his lips really hard and pushing down. And
I think you're just. You're digging for deep emotion, and you want it to come from your body through the guitar, and connect with the audience, and then that exchange comes back from the audience. That's the ultimate goal in music. Sometimes those things just you can't be up there posing. You got to just let it, flow out naturally.
I think that's what just looking at the old videos of live performances by hair metal bands, it was all just a front. I mean, not Van Halen. Van Halen's really playing, and there's great guitarists.
Yeah, I don't think you can consider them hair metal. They predated the hair metal, and they they were concurrent as far as the years some of their music came out, but they never were and there's other bands in there that get lumped in that really aren't, but. In the 80s, there was a bit of posing going on. When the mousse in your hair is more important than your guitar tone
Aquanet,
in the spray. There you go. So, that music just never hit me. It should have, because I was in my early 20s. When I'm a contemporary basically with those bands as far as age goes, but it just never hit me. I was never into it.
When did you? So you have ZOAR now, and then you said there was a lineup change in the 90s. When did Music Alley come into play?
Right at the same time. So I had a busy life. By that point, I had 2 kids.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
How many kids do you have total?
I have 3 total.
Okay. Yeah. I've only ever known your daughter. I'm guessing you're youngest.
So I have 2 older kids.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 kids in your age bracket, and then one younger one. So that's always kept me, as much as I love music. I've had great relationships with all 3 kids and done so much with them, with sports and different activities and things. Coached a lot of teams, and I would never have traded that for anything. It was amazing of what made life for me up to this point so wonderful.
Yeah.
Even though I loved music, it has its place centered around my children, especially in all that. So.
Yeah, I view life the same way. So the very first episode, my wife and I were talking about how her mindset is, and it works because we're opposite, so it works out. Is she goes work, school, kids, then me, and then mine is her kids, work. So we kind of balance each other out there and keep each other kind of grounded, but yeah, if we were both just, work, we'd never.
That's tough. Yeah, that's tough. Yeah.
But she has more aspirations than me. That's why she's getting her doctorate while teaching full time, being a mom and a wife. So
yeah, good first.
Yeah. Before we get too much into Music Alley, I just have to ask real quick: Did ZOAR ever tour with any pretty big name bands at all?
Not tour, but we were lucky enough to have played opening slots for some national acts.
Okay.
The last time of which was not that long ago. We opened up for the Marshall Tucker Band who's
Was this
a
at the-
platinum selling. That was at the
Trout Run.
campground. I think it was just pre-COVID, so it might have been 2019.
He had Oyster Cult in, and my parents and I went there to that.
Okay, and he asked us to open for those guys as well. So they've been very gracious to us, Kevin and the folks at Trout Run. Blue Oyster Cult, we had another gig that day, so I respectfully declined. And I'm not so sure that our type of music would have been a perfect match for opening for them, because they're a little heavier.
Yeah. That's the kind of music I grew up with.
Yeah. But we were also on tap to open for 38 Special.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit. So, and we've opened for Bad Company, and we've been, we've been offered slots for other bands like Molly Hatchet and the Goo Goo Dolls. So just being sort of known in this area, when
you are, ZOAR, let's be real, is the premier band in our area, I feel. In the Southern
we've
tier.
been very lucky. and I've felt very lucky to have had a long run, to be able to have played for multi-generations of folks, being embraced by the community. So we've been lucky, very, very lucky. So we work hard at it, and we're just lucky to have been around this long.
You're a humble guy. You're just talented. The band's talented.
The band is talented, and the other guys in it now are both very talented guys. So they make it easy. It's weird. So we're a three-piece band, and when you're a three-piece band,
Was it always a three-piece?
it started as a quartet. So 2002, one of the third or fourth or fifth guitar player that we had in the other position decided to leave. His personal life got real busy and whatnot, and decided to leave. And so we played a couple of gigs as a three-piece. And there's lots of benefits to that, including the money splits a little bit
money.
better three ways than fours. But at the same time, it really was an eye-opener to how good we could make three guys sound and how full. And at the time, it was Monty Case on drums, Roger Carlin on bass, and myself. And those two, really, I respectfully say, are monster players.
Yeah.
Monsters. They're just incredible players. So I was so lucky because when they took me in ZOAR, when we, the first rehearsals, they wanted a second guitar player to fill out the, but I had something going. They had a female vocalist, but then when I, shortly after hooked back up in '88, I was at best, I would say, an average or intermediate player.
Okay.
Those guys, and this has happened not only to other players along the way, I would say, but they took me in, and I feel like that I went to ZOAR College as far as musicianship goes. And those guys provided me with invaluable musical skills and experience, and just watching them and how they approach certain things, and at practice breaking down parts and harmonies, and so I went to ZOAR College. I was very, very lucky to have fallen in with the guys that I fell in with. And I absorbed it, and I took it serious, and I appreciate the gift that was given me. And hopefully I've passed that along to other people along the way.
I'm pretty sure you're an influential guy. You've influenced me in my life, so guitar playing life. I'm sure I really appreciate that, and I'm sure the guys really appreciate you, talking good about them. So
well, they're and we've had now probably 5 or 6 bass players over the years. And the guy that's in now, his name is Chris Dahill. He's the new guy, and he's been in 14 years. So.
But do you find that each person, when you have a new lineup change, and you're a local band, so you can kind of get away with it a little easier, as far as, when a band changes, a membership changes on a really large touring band, it's like the end of the world. But with you guys, did you find that it kind of added a little more diversity to the band, because everybody has their own style? Yeah,
well, every music change, we've been lucky. So we've always had really good players. When we had an imminent lineup change coming. In the last many years, it was always a bass player. People's lives change, and maybe they have kids that are becoming teenagers, and they know they can't. Because we used to play a lot. And so things like that. Lifestyle changes. Maybe they're moving. Maybe they have a different job. Whatever changes. Monty and I always sort of kept the band where we knew we were in for the long haul. So he and I have really been together for 35, almost 36 years. But the bass player changes. Each guy did bring a different set of skills. Mm-hmm. They all covered the base of what you needed adequately.
Right.
And then we would try to tap in what unique talent directionally that their personal talent brought to the band.
Right.
So,
it might not even just be their bass playing skills. It could be their singing or anything like that.
Yeah, sometimes they're singing. The guy we got now, Chris Dayhill, is a sound whiz. So he knows equipment. He knows all that stuff. We've had other guys that are real good in that area too. So it can be almost anything. Previous bass player Roger Carlin. Besides being an incredible bass player, he could fix anything. So the truck broke down.
The MacGyver guy.
Yeah, the truck broke down. Roger would be there to help fix it. If whatever. Fortunately, I'm not going to fix anybody's truck.
Do you still have that blue van that you use?
I don't. I sold that. A guy talked me out of it. Believe it or not. Yeah. That's true.
I used to love my studio used to be right next door, and I used to love pulling in next to that van.
Oh yeah, the blue van was great. But even more legendary than the blue van, ZOAR had a 1976 U-Haul for 25 years.
Really?
Yep. And we bought it for a couple thousand, maybe $3,000 at Cook's back in the late 80s, I think 89. And that U-Haul lasted for 25 years. It was
wow. How many miles?
Died.
The estimate.
It obviously had turned over multiple times. Before we even got it, I think it had over 150,000. So
they were highway miles. It's fine.
Highway miles. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 270,000.
Wow.
When we got rid of it. But that was a special thing just because we bought it collectively, and then we, had membership changes, and we had to redistribute how that was purchased. And it was the one piece of equipment that was owned collectively. Everybody else owned their own stuff.
Yeah, I don't care.
And that always works best that way in a band. So if you're going to put a band together, don't go in together. Yeah. just everybody bring to the table what they bring to the table. That helps. But anyway, Monty and I ended up owning the U-Haul collectively for all those years. So
did you squeeze the original four members in that, or did you drive separate vehicles?
We drove. Monty always drove himself. Although he did keep his drums in there for quite a while.
Okay.
So usually me and Raj rode in the band truck,
right.
And Monty would meet us.
Huh. What? Moving forward with Music Alley, what made you decide to start? And what did Music Alley start as an instrument shop, or did it start as a record store? So I worked at the radio station, and in 1991, there was an impending ownership change in the radio station. A gentleman and his wife, I believe, centered out of the Rochester area, and they also owned other stations, were in the process of purchasing WJQZ from the owners, which were Mike Baldwin and Terry Swift, that still owned it at the time. So 91. So these guys had owned it for the first 5 years. When they owned it, it was a fun place to work. It was sort of like it was like WKRP. You'd go in, everybody had their own personality. It was like a little family run place. And we had a format that at the time, I think they probably had labeled it as hot AC, which is adult contemporary, but a hotter. Hot means rather than maybe Barbra Streisand and Neil Diamond,
at the time you could play Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, Bruce Hornsby in the range. It encompassed a little bit more. And then we also had a component where we played Beatles and Stones and some oldies. As long as you didn't play Helter Skelter by the Beatles or something heavier, you could, and it was all programmed. You had a playlist and you were supposed to stick to the playlist. It wasn't like the DJs could come in and play their own music.
Right.
Every single song was choreographed in card boxes and you played it right,
Really?
Yep. And when I worked there, 86 to 91.
How'd you do that with requests though?
Well, requests could be honored. We had a Friday night request show, which I never was on that show. Chris Eldridge used to do that show. He ended up following me a lot. We grew up on Highland Avenue together. Unfortunately, he's passed away now, but he was a really wonderful guy and a cool guy to, come in after you. So I'm working and he would be getting ready for his show. And it was always, so he did that show on Friday nights after the afternoon drive. But, so WJQZ was, this impending sale was going, and I had just been, named musical director and program director of the station. So I did that for about maybe 6-8 months. And then all of a sudden this ownership change is coming. So I had worked my way up from the...
They give you a raise and a promotion and then they sell it.
Exactly. Weekend DJ to afternoon drive, then midday drive. Then I'm the morning, not the morning guy, but the mid-morning guy.
Yeah.
And I'm the program director. I'm choosing the music and everything's starting to just really click. And then the owners come in, and nothing against the new owners, but it just changed the entire atmosphere of the place.
Yeah.
So it wasn't quite as fun of a job at that point, and they changed the music to like standard adult contemporary.
Okay.
No more hot AC. So now
Neil Diamond.
So now I'm looking at playing Barbra Streisand, Neil Diamond, and I'm thinking that ain't going to happen. Two amazing artists in their own right.
Yeah.
Nothing against the music, but I'm 25, 24 years old, and I can't see myself going through the next 20 years playing that. So laid the groundwork for Music Alley.
Okay.
91.
And so did it start as a
Okay, yeah. So two friends, Dan Peters, who's been like a lifelong friend of myself and my family especially. He was my brother Bill's age. And another friend, Patty Crest, decided that Wellsville needed, at that point, the last sort of music store that was a record shop at the time. Ed was no longer doing records, and Rice Music that we had spoken of previously went out of business, I think in 87.
Okay. So they've been out for a while then.
Yeah. So there was a vacuum there for either or, but it was 91. So what we thought would be the best course to start a business was CDs.
Okay, yeah.
So when we started, we were CDs, cassettes, and stereo equipment.
Okay.
And we hadn't got into guitars quite yet.
Do you need to grab a drink real quick?
I'm good now.
Okay. So you hadn't gotten into guitars yet. You were a music shop as far as like a quote-unquote record store that sold CDs and stuff. No 8-tracks?
No 8-tracks. 8-tracks were dead by then.
That kind of died off.
Yeah,
quick,
8-tracks was a silly format, really. The audio quality wasn't overly great. They switched to the next track right in the middle of songs sometimes.
Oh.
Because each track could be a certain length. So right in the middle of a song, they would switch. The only thing that gave you at the time of their design, I think, was the portability of being able to go into a vehicle. So some of the old vehicles had 8 tracks right built into the stereo.
Yep.
So that was really their only charm. I think in 91 when we started, I would say cassette was king.
Yeah, because
cassette was king. CDs were fastly approaching. Records were dead.
Yeah.
Records were dead then. And
that if we only knew, if we could have just bought up all the records back then.
well, that's what I did.
Cheap. Yeah.
Because I have this soft spot for records. So when people were like, I'm going to get rid of my records, you want to buy them? I'd be like, yeah, bring them down.
Yeah.
And I just stored them for a long time because I just couldn't, bear the thought of them ending up in the landfill or at the dump. So, so I kept, and now they're back. So we started out that way, and we were just lucky. 1991 was like a literal explosion of music that
Nirvana, right?
Nirvana, Metallica.
Was that when the Black Album came
The
out?
Black Album came out in 91. Guns N' Roses.
Never
Use Your
mind,
Illusion 1 and
Appetite
2.
Okay. Appetite with Destruction was more 80s, right?
No, that was right in that wheel. That was 80s.
Yeah.
But Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, which were the follow-ups, and they were a huge deal. That was 91.
Oh, man.
Nirvana was like a seismic shift in the music industry. That was 91. The Metallica Black Album is the best-selling album in the history of Music Alley, by far.
Really?
By far.
Do you have something to track it?
Just here.
How much would you estimate that you sold?
Oh gosh, I couldn't
in
even.
any format.
Initially, cassettes, thousands and thousands.
Really?
Thousands. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's
you can thank Metallica for your success now.
Pearl Jam came out.
Oh yeah.
You're talking about not only, and we're talking about like hard rock, but you're talking about groups.
Soundgarden.
Yeah, all those grunge artists came out. But then in the rap field, or hip hop field, you had like Dr. Dre, The Chronic. You had Snoop Doggy Dogg. You had Public Enemy. These bands were coming out. You had Ice Cube, and all that stuff was coming out. In country, in short order, you had people breaking like. I hate to say this, but Billy Ray Cyrus at the time was huge. And then in short order, Garth Brooks broke big, Shania Twain. So, and then in just the rock field, people that were getting rid of their record collection, now they wanted to replace their Led Zeppelin CDs or their Led Zeppelin records with CDs. And there's ZZ Top records with CDs. And so all those catalog artists that were classic rock, they were huge. So it was just like the right time for that business. So CDs quickly became king, but the first year or two, I'd say cassettes still outsold CDs, but from then on, CDs just became huge.
Can I tell you something? The first album I ever bought for myself was in it was like in a Salmon Goodies or something, but it was Korn's self-titled first release.
Okay, yeah, one with a shadow.
It had Blind on it and everything. Yeah. It was a cassette tape, and it had the parental advisory on it. And I think I was like 12, and I took it up there, and the dude just like looked at me, and he looked down, and he's like, I don't think he got paid enough to care. He sold it to me.
Yeah, I think for a time there, like technically they wanted people to be 14 in order.
Was it 14?
I think so.
Okay, yeah. I just assumed that it was like 17 or 18.
I think it was 14.
I was clearly not 14. But yeah, so Korn self-titled, original self-titled was the first album I ever bought. So it was on sale for $5 or something like that, because it was a cassette. Because like you said, this is when CDs had taken over, and I wish I still had that, because it's probably worth so much money. Because people are buying cassettes again, bands are releasing cassettes.
Yeah. That's
they're more.
I don't think that's going to catch on, but
I think they're more just kind of like a
nostalgic kind of thing.
Yeah, but they're coming up in money.
Yeah, I noticed that.
So when did guitars come in? Or musical instruments?
Shortly into our inception, which was September of 91, I'd say into 92, we were gauging people's interests and people's what they were looking for, and we always had guitar strings right from the beginning.
Yep.
And so we wanted to fill that so people would at least be able to buy guitar strings, picks, and drumsticks without having to drive 30 miles or whatever.
Did you always sell like the woodwind reeds and everything like that too?
Yeah.
I used to come in and buy those when I played sax.
Yeah. So we tried to keep the small goods as far as musical needs go. But we got asked enough about guitars in 92, 93, I think 92, that I decided to look into what it would be if we became a dealer for a certain brand. So we talked to Fender, we talked to Gibson, and we talked to Washburn as far as the acoustic guitars go. So the buy-in or initial dealership agreement for the Gibson and Fenders was like unbelievable what they expected you would buy from them, and had to sell every year. So the idea of being able to do that in Wellsville, it would have been crazy. I would have loved to have been a Fender dealer or a Gibson dealer, but they wanted you to buy in 1990s, like $25,000 worth of their stuff on your first order, and then maintain like that every year. So it would have been difficult in being in tune with what, I thought we really could do, and not get go out on a limb and get something that we couldn't keep and maintain. The Washburn buy-in was it was like 12 guitars. And they were an acoustic guitar that had models, and I still have some today.
Yeah.
It was an acoustic guitar that had ranges from like entry level all the way up to super professional. Really? But it had a niche in there where I thought we could sell guitars, nice guitars for under $200 at the time. They had solid tops, and they did have some electrics, even though they've never been known for their electrics. So we went with Washburn to start with, just to kind of see. And we bought in at the 12 guitars that they wanted us, and ever since then we've had some guitar presence. And as the guitar presence became more popular, you can only dedicate so much space to stuff that doesn't sell. Stereo equipment sort of was on the downslide. Things were getting more miniature, and so people weren't looking for huge home systems anymore. So we sort of phased that out and expanded the guitars a little bit. But pre-recorded music really has always been the biggest focus of the store, and now sort of records are.
The records are definitely just back. They're not even coming back. They're back, I think. Not as much because they're not fighting with CDs anymore. Records are the physical media now, because there's MP3s and Spotify.
Right, and people.
Do you not agree with that?
Yeah. Okay. Records are definitely. It's a different experience, and some people like the convenience and speed of popping up a playlist on their Spotify or whatever, Pandora. They just sort of pop it on. But the people that really get super connected with music, to hold a record is a whole different thing. I watched your podcast with Rich Shear, and he talked about, opening something and having the smell of the new shoe, the running shoes or whatever at the time. The records are the same way. I mean, I have probably 600 records in my collection at home. And
what does that look like? Do you have shelves, or are they scattered? I have
one really nice shelf that my kids bought me for Christmas one year that my nephew made, and it's really cool. So the 600 is a pretty stout collection. Certainly people have a lot more, but that I can pull almost any record out.
Know exactly where it is.
Well, I know where it is. They're in alphabetical order.
Oh.
And I know which ones I'm missing because I've loaned them out and never got them back. But
if you have Rick's records, bring them back.
But even more so, you can pull out a record, and it's different than a CD because I never had the connection with a CD. But I can pull out a record and I can say, oh man, I bought that at the White Marsh Mall in 1985.
Yeah.
Right before I left Baltimore back for Wellsville. And it'll be Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run or whatever, Born in the USA. And a record, when you hold it, it's a different thing. The art is bigger.
Yeah.
The liner notes connect you. There's room, more room for information to consume. And there's a distinct smell when you crack the cellophane and you get that vinyl for the first time. So yeah, any one of my records can really transport me back to probably the time where I bought it. So they're really cool in that way. They just like have this mojo that for me, I guess, because I'm a music guy and I'm a record guy more than, that's my favorite. I've always loved records.
Speaking of pulling you back real quick, what is your number one, like, coming of age album?
Okay, so
only one. No.
Oh, I have one. I actually have two. But so number one, this is a kind of a cool story. Big End department store for folks that are of the age that would know is out where Ames was.
Yes.
It predated Ames.
Oh, okay.
And it was an incredibly cool store. And it was Wellsville's first sort of, maybe Newberry's might have beat it, which was on the corner here on Main, which was a cool store too.
Yeah.
But anyway, Big End had a really cool record department. And so when I was a kid, we had 5 kids. I'm the youngest of 5. And my mom would take us once in a while to Big End. And generally not all of us. It was like a rotational kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But if it got to be your turn and you got to go with mom to Big End, it was usually 1 or 2 of us got to go.
Yeah.
And you were good. For me, it usually meant like she would buy you something that equaled $1.
Okay.
So in Big End, they had a great record department, and they had 45s, which were 99 cents.
And I think that Rich was talking about those.
And they also had a lot of baseball cards, which were 10 cents a pack. So the kids and adults that buy cards now, and the packs are like $5.
Oh, Pokemon cards are $6 at times. My kids are into Pokemon.
So I was buying, Topps baseball and basketball and football cards in the 70s for 10 cents a pack. Usually at Boots' store on Stevens Street in Wellsville, but at all these corner stores. And if I couldn't get the guy I was looking for, I was like superstitious. I would try Frederick's or one of the other stores.
Someone has to have what I'm.
But Big End, I would either get cards. Usually it was cards at the time. But every once in a while it would be a 45. And I remember one time my brother, my sister, and myself went. And my 2 oldest sisters didn't go, and we all picked out a 45. And I remember it was around 73 because I got Paul McCartney Band on the Run.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And my brother got Leonard Skinner's Sweet Home Alabama.
Okay.
And my sister Lisa got The Locomotion by Grand Funk.
All 3 great songs.
All 3 great songs. And at my house, if it was yours, and you didn't want anybody else messing with it. So, you didn't get to touch their records.
Did you only have one record player? Or did you have?
We had one in the living room and that one that I was speaking of that we kind of shared.
Suitcase one. Okay.
So I think it would have been early 74. So I was probably 8 years old, and I love Band on the Run. Great song. Mm-hmm. So I made a really cool choice. But when my brother would leave to go do something and I started playing his record, I liked his better than I liked mine.
Really?
And his was Sweet Home Alabama. So the guitar, even then, that's what spoke to me, the way that guitar riff came in. So that leads to, okay, where did this come from? This is a 45 with one song.
Yep.
It came from an album, a larger collection, and that album was Second Helping.
Yep.
So that was one of the very first records I ever purchased. Still one of my favorite to this day. And it's because it connected, my love of guitar and hearing the guitar come in on that song to now, so.
Is that the one with Freebird on it?
It is not. No,
okay.
It's the follow-up. And the one with Freebird's a great record, too. That's their debut.
Yeah.
Called Pronounced Leonard Skinner. But Second Helping came next. Yes.
So their sophomore is your number one. I was honestly, I assumed that it would have been a Bob Dylan record.
Yeah, I like them very well too.
Whenever I talk to you always bring up Bob Dylan, I feel like.
Yeah, he's, his lyrics are they're just so astounding that when you hear his words and you think how somebody could shape words in that fashion to have such a profound impact. So he's an amazing. Obviously, the music is just basic, 3 or 4 chord music, so it's not like any real intricate musically, but the lyrics certainly are, in the way they rhyme and everything.
I remember asking you when I was younger, because I've been coming into this shop since I was probably 11 or 12. I remember asking you, like, because my generation was new metal, so like Linkin Park and Stain, Disturbed, all those guys, and I was like, what do you think the heaviest album that you ever listened to was? And you're like, well. Yeah, and I can't remember what the name of the album was, but it was definitely a Bob Dylan album, and you were like, my heavy is kind of different from your heavy, and I was like,
that's a good answer. Yeah, that would be the one. I probably told you to listen to the one with the song "With God on Our Side" and all those, because the lyrics are like, whoa, they are heavy.
I honestly can't remember what it was. I just remember that it was Bob Dylan. I'm like, Bob Dylan. It's not heavy, because I'm thinking heavy as in like down-tuned guitars, like
right.
smash it down.
Yeah. So, being here all those years, I would have every day, not as much now, but back in the day, somebody would come in and they're like, hey, what do you think of the new, Korn album?
Yeah.
And it'd be like, it's outside the scope of my listening pleasure, but I wouldn't really want to say, I don't like Korn, dude.
You can't say that when you're on a record store.
So I haven't heard that yet, but I hear it's good. I hear people like it. I never would want to dissuade somebody from following the path that moves them musically. But yeah, Bob Dylan, if you listen, there's some heavy stuff on there.
Well, my coming of age album, which I've bought I don't know how many times because I kept wearing out the CD, it would chip, is Stain's Break the Cycle. And I remember, like, I had this little CD player boombox that I would bring into the car, because I don't know why we had it, but my parents would have to buy C batteries like every other day. But and like when it would swear, because I bought the unedited one, I'd like hit it, and I didn't realize that even if I hit it, it would just start back up from where it was, because I tried to block out the swears.
Yeah. Because you didn't want your parents to hear it?
I didn't want my parents to hear the swears, and they didn't.
They might confiscate.
Yeah, they didn't care. But I got into it because Greg, my stepdad, listened to the heavier stuff, and so I'm like, all right, I'll give rock a try. And it was Linkin Park, and then the Stained album, it was Outside. I don't know if you've heard that song.
Oh, I'm familiar with that song. Yeah,
but he did that. I heard it on the radio when he did it with Fred Durst live, and I was like, wow, I really like that. And Aaron Lewis is definitely not my favorite person from what he became, but I still love I love all their records, because they are pretty, in my mind, pretty powerful, and they're heavy. Yeah. That's what got me into baritone guitars, was just like wanting to get that low tone and the deepness.
Right. Nice.
But my wife, this past year, they came back, and she's like, "Do you want to go see him?" I'm like, "No," because I don't want their legacy to be tainted with, if he goes on one of his tangents that he's well known for now. And I'm like, I just want to keep them. Like, their album is great. I'll still listen to it, but I don't want to take that chance.
Right. I've seen them 5 times
like
that now. So I haven't seen Leonard Skinner in many years, and it's sort of the same thing with them. They had a tragic history in a plane crash, and even though I never got to see the original band, I saw the band as they regrouped, where it had a good bit of members that were still in, but as it dropped off one by one, their sort of newer music changed in the way that just the lyrical tenor of it and it sort of turned me off to a little bit to their newer stuff, and to the fact that you got a band now that there's nobody in it that made the music. That's a tough call. I mean, I guess support the fact that they can still go play and earn a living doing it, but you were getting there's 0 of 7 original members. It's tough in that regard.
We gotta wrap up in a couple minutes, but I do have I have a couple more things. First is going to be, I just want your opinion on something, because we kind of touched on it just a little bit just now. But what do you think that there's a time when bands should just call it a day? So like the legacy bands that like Guns N' Roses. I mean, Axl can't sing anymore. The bands like that, Motley Crue, they can't they just can't do
That
it.
guy never really could sing.
Right. So, which one?
Vince Neil.
Okay. So, but do you think there's a time? Because I mean, like the Stones are still going strong, and they obviously don't sound like they used to, but they don't sound bad. You know,
Right. Here's the interesting thing. My take on bands and music. At some point in this, you could even approach it on a local level, like ZOAR. A band at some point, if they're charging and making money, is also a business entity.
Yeah. And
it has to be set up in that regard at some point, and structured as a business entity. So you get a band like Foreigner, or a band like Leonard Skinner, or a band like where there's no original members all of a sudden, but there is a corporation, and there is management and principles, branding that so they run that out there, and they make money off of the brand that they've built, regardless of who's making the music on stage. Right. And if they had any connection to the glory days of that particular band, that is a hard one to swallow, but in the end, it is a business. So, you know, that's fair game for my, you know, liking. When a band gets to the point where they have lost all connections to the original membership, that's a hard sell. So, you know, with Guns N' Roses, I think there's still got some creativity left in the band.
Sure. I wasn't, they're talented.
Yeah.
But Axl can't, I mean, Axl, he does better than most of that generation.
Well,
but
the biggest one you think of is when you saw Van Halen touring, and when it was David Lee Roth was back, and the poor guy, he can't even carry a tune anymore. His voice is
starting to
he's starting to, those guys, the problem with some of those guys is they wrote all their songs at the very top of their range.
Yeah.
So when they were in their 20s and 30s, you know, they could easily go out there and fly up to the top of their range and hit those notes. But now, you know, Bon Jovi's probably early 60s or whatever he is. Those notes might not even be in his range
wheelhouse,
any longer. On a good day, he might be able to go there, but on a bad day, it might expose, you know, so sometimes they have to adjust keys and things like that. But, you know, that's why I take my hat off to the Stones.
Yeah.
Because they still, and I read a great article on Keith Richards last night. He's had to change the way that he plays because his fingers are so arthritic. The dude's 79.
Yeah. I mean, they're
so he said, you know, he can still play. He can't play everything that he used to play, but it's opened to the doors to things he might not have thought of because now he has limitations and he has to rethink things. But then you take Jagger, he's kept himself in great condition.
Yep.
And
they're both pickled, I feel like. Their bodies are just pickled. They're
that's definitely Keith.
Yeah.
Mick is like this case study of a guy that's always maintained physical fitness.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, his dad was the English fitness guide guru, a governmental position when he was young. That's what his dad did. So that's always been part of his regiment. Even as a child. So the dude, he's 80 and he can run around for they play 2+ hours. Their concerts are long and incredible.
That's crazy. I was listening to an interview with Gene Simmons, right? Who's Kiss?
Gene Simmons, yeah.
Gene Simmons,
the bass player.
And they you know, they keep coming back with multiple farewell tours, but he was talking, he's like, we're not. And he wasn't putting the Rolling Stones down, but he was like, we're not the Rolling Stones where they can just come out in sneakers and T-shirts.
Right.
You know, they have such a theatrical performance that it's just hard for them
wearing 6-inch heels.
Yeah. It's just hard for them to keep
fall
going.
Off those when you're.
And I think, you know, I think like when Journey, because I love Journey. I don't care what anybody says. My mom listens to that. I know how you feel about them. But when Steve left, it's like, why keep going? I mean, I know that the band.
Yeah, there's a tough one.
Because the new guy is great. I'm not putting Arnell down, but it's not.
But he's essentially copying.
Yeah, it's karaoke of Steve Perry, and then they have Queen has.
Adam Lambert.
Adam
now,
Lambert, who's again a phenomenal singer, but it's not Freddie Mercury. It's like why?
When you lose a front man that sings,
Yeah.
that is a difficult thing. It's
It has a
easier.
unique voice too.
Yeah, it's easier to replace, say, a drummer or a bass player or a guitar player and get away with it. But when you change the vocalist, then you're essentially changing the entire sound.
It's just start a new band, right?
Yeah, it's a tough thing. But
I get the
then
I get
again,
your
the
side, the
branding,
business. Yeah, the business side
has always got such a huge impact on
Yep.
you know, if there's still a value in touring and people will pay to hear, hired guns play the original music, I guess that's their game.
I guess if you're not going into it, like if you're a new fan that kind of finds their songs on Spotify,
Right.
Pandora,
And that's what a lot of it is
they don't
somebody,
really-
they don't have a connection
Yep.
to the original band, so they don't feel that emotional, like, geez, I'm going to go see such and such without, But if the Stones are so iconic, and they hold up as the best example because they started in the early 60s, so we're talking 60 years.
yeah, no, they're still great.
They're still great. They still can cut it live.
Yep.
They still have they've got a new album coming out, so they're still creative. And they still have most of their principal members in place.
Yep.
So it still has relevance. So it's nice to see. I would go see them now when their next tour comes out because you never know. These great rockers are dying off quickly one by one. And such a magical time in American musical history. Groups that became iconic in the 60s, 70s, and 80s are slowly dwindling down. So.
Yeah. And they're the legacy bands at this point. Bands are
right.
Like in my wheelhouse, bands are trying to be the Metallicas of like my generation. They're trying to be that,
right?
That like bands like Papa Roach and stuff like that are, and they say that, and people are smashing them, but in reality, Metallica's going to be slowing down eventually. So someone else has to kind of step up and not fill the shoes. I'm not saying that, and bands, any band that's still touring now, but I think we are in that shift of.
Yeah, we need some good bands to come out.
Yeah. There are some. There's some, at least in the the rock genre. There's some bands like Bad Omens and Bring Me the Horizon, other bands that are kind of taking it.
Unfortunately, they're not getting the exposure
that
allows them to sell enough music to connect with enough people to fill auditoriums or stadiums.
Yeah.
So
Bring Me the Horizon is getting there. I remember I saw them for the first time in Pittsburgh with my buddy Mike. And I've never been to a show where the crowd was singing so loud I could not even hear, because I just.
That would be Tom Petty.
Was it Tom Petty?
Yeah, almost to the point where it was like, come on.
Quiet down, guys.
Let me hear Tom.
But yeah, it's a loud show anyways, but I couldn't hear him over the crowd just like pelting out their songs. That's gotta be a great feeling. I guess my last question is, how is it a feeling from that when you go to shows and fans are singing your original songs? What does that feel like?
That's pretty cool. And I've had at least one song where I'll run into somebody from an area that'll say, "Yeah, we cover that song."
Wow, that's cool.
Wow. It's just an interesting thing. But it's really, really kind of interesting to be able to pull out an original or two and have people either ask for it or sing along to it. That's a pretty cool feeling. Sort of a sense of accomplishment that you created something that had some impact. Is just satisfying as far as being a musician that dedicated some time to original music.
Yeah. Well, Rick, you've had a 30-plus year career. Oh, okay. Hold on. Let's go.
Okay. I almost forgot this. So he saw me moving records around earlier.
I did. Oh, my God.
He's been asking for the next time I get this record in, Tears for Fears, for I would say a couple of years. And for years here at the store, I would say this was like pop rock from the 80s.
This is a new wave, right?
Kind of with a new wave, new wave sort of feel. And for the longest time, those records were a dime a dozen. I couldn't get rid of them, and I had tons of bands. But as this record hobby is encompassing different age groups, those bands started to get really hot and people were buying them up. So I haven't had this album in for probably a year, and I just got it in. And because Nick is such a great such a great community guy, I wanted to give him this record on his own podcast. So that's for you, Nick.
This is amazing. You're going to make me cry. I'm an emotional guy, for one.
So am I. It's like I coach girls softball, a 12-year-old group, and I tell them, the first thing I tell them at practice is, there's no crying.
Yeah, there's no crying.
If you strike out, there's no crying. There's if you get mad, there's no crying. If you get hurt, you can cry. And if we win, we can all cry together.
This is amazing. Thank you so much. I've been looking for this record, not just here, anywhere, and no one has this record.
It became pretty hot.
This is a heavy touring song. They are. They're touring. They were just in Canandaigua, and I didn't see them, and I'm punching myself. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And is there anything that you would like to say to just the community or your fans, that have been around for the past 30 plus years?
I think the community's always been great. I feel like our community, of course, Wellsville, but even just the surrounding area, even the Western New York area encompassing Buffalo, we have like the spirit of a pay it forward kind of vibe. And I appreciate that being instilled in me, and I hope that I can pass that on. So I just like the idea of being kind of a pay it forward kind of guy, and that's sort of how I approach things. Leave something better than what you got it, and go from there.
With that, you had mentioned that you wanted to bring up, to close out here, a benefit that you're going to be doing.
Right. So we have a benefit coming up for the ZOAR's performing that some folks are putting on October 22nd, which is a Sunday. Mm-hmm. It's at the Field House. They're opening the Field House up special for this benefit, like noon to 5 time, with a big Chinese auction, and it's for a young child that's been diagnosed with cancer. A local family that happened to be my neighbors. Tom Muska, he's the coach of the Wellsville High School varsity boys basketball team. So that's going on October 22nd.
Okay. That's
so
fantastic.
If folks could see it maybe in their schedule to just pop by and drop $5 into the pot, that would be awesome to help that family.
And they can just stay for the tunes.
Or stay for the tunes. Got a really good musical lineup that day. We got Matt Burns playing. We've got Adam Stack playing. We got ZOAR playing.
Adam Stack. That guy's a guitarist.
Very good guitar player. Very good guy.
His singing's getting much better.
Oh, he's great. Yeah, he's great.
Well, thank you very much for being on, Rick, and look forward to hearing what ZOAR has coming out next.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks, Nick.